Good Tuesday morning of the fifth week of Easter. You know, it's interesting today. You see in the Acts of the Apostles, Paul and Barnabas get stoned. They get rejected. And in getting rejected, they keep moving on. It's the story of the movement from Jerusalem to Rome. You see, it's the life of the church, but it's the life of the church through suffering and proclamation of the gospel. They suffered as they preach it as they suffer. That's the life of the church. It isn't the comfort of being, let's say, the center of a culture as it became, okay? It's when the church is best when she preaches out of her suffering. I mean that. To be complacent in the culture is exactly what the church doesn't need. And I think part of her corruption was when, in the time of the Protestant Reformation, the church needed reformation. It had become corrupt. It had become corrupt from the top down. It wasn't the suffering church. It was the complacent, arrogant church. And it needed to be reformed. And that's the truth. The church is always best, as it were, on the run, never comfortable in the culture. Always, in a sense, in a dialectical tension, loving it, loving the culture, loving the people, and at the same time, the spirit of rejection, a counter voice. I'll show it to you, even in the gospel. This is really interesting. John's gospel, he says, this chapter 14, he says, Jesus said to his disciples, peace I leave you, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give it to you. Don't let your hearts be troubled or afraid. You heard me tell you, I am going away and I will come back to you. If you loved me, you would rejoice that I'm going to the Father, for the Father is greater than I. And now I have told you this before it happens, so that when it happens, you may believe. I will no longer speak much with you, for the ruler of the world is coming. He has no power over me, but the world must know that I love the Father, and that I do just as the Father has commanded me. What is he referring to? He's referring to Good Friday. You remember the prayer in the garden? If you can take this from me, but not my will be done. Not my will, but yours be done. This is a different version of the same prayer. He goes to the Father, which means he's obedient unto death, even death on the cross. You see? St. Paul's letter to the Philippians. See? Yeah. See? The peace comes through the cross of Christ. It doesn't come through power. That's the peace that comes through the world, and it's a fragile peace. But it comes from their sharing in the passion of Christ. To be able to embrace life, to embrace it in its suffering and its joy, to share, and we fill out those things, wanting in the suffering of Christ. What a brilliant sentence. It's the meaning of life itself. I think of that. I think of the martyrs. I think of all the people who have suffered. I think of my own fellow Passionists who were imprisoned in China. I only heard one time one of the fellow Passionists who, I agreed with him. He had a little more than an edge. He had suffered greatly, but most of all, his people had suffered greatly, maybe killed. When my brother was in the army, Pete was being transferred. He was being stationed in Korea. And I remember one of my fellow Passionists, I think it was Father Basil Bauer. He was a tough guy. He was a great man. But he said to me, if you see any comments, say hello to him for me at the end of a bullet. That's what he said. I can remember that was 60 years ago. It's 1962. It's 61 years ago. If you see one, say hello to me at the end of a bullet, at the end of your rifle, or something like that. That was the only time I ever heard one of my fellow Passionists we called them our China hands. Those are the fellows that went to China, often were imprisoned, especially by the communists, but even the Japanese, I believe, I'm not sure but positive about the communists. And I wonder how many of their converts who became Christians were martyred. I wonder. The blood of the martyrs in China. I have no doubt of the blood of the martyrs in China, but I wonder how many were particularly my fellow Passionist converts, okay? But I remember I told you that story, how they yearned to go back. And finally they did visit China. And they met some of their old parishioners. What a wonderful story of redemption. See, once one embraces the passion of Christ, I'm so grateful I'm a Passionist, because our central spirituality is aimed at the passion of Christ and our participation in it, because it's the core of the faith. Who and what is Christ, and what did he do? He died on the cross, obedient to his Father, and we can join him as we live out our lives. We can join him on the cross. That's the truth. And once you see that, in some manner or other, you're able to see the suffering of the world, not with despair, but with hope, that it's a sharing in the death of Christ, and such, therefore, of his resurrection, that life triumphs over death, goodness over evil, hope over despair. I hang on to that with both hands, and both feet, and anything else I can grab onto it, because life is unfair. It's cruelly unfair. You see? But if you see things in the light of Christ, who suffered, okay, who endured its unfairness, then you have hope. Not a solution, but hope for triumph of goodness over evil. That is so, so important in life. I wonder about our young people. No, not just our young. Well, I do wonder about our young people. What will they believe? When I teach our kids, I told you that already, I see so many who are by 20 years old have rejected the faith, rejected any faith at all. I wonder what they will believe in as the harshness of life hits them, when the bittersweetness of life, the bitter side of the bittersweetness hits them. Will they have hope that it is not all in vain? I wonder. And one of my friends, so many of my friends who left the faith, so many. Maybe what they left was the pseudo-piety of the 50s. They didn't really understand Christianity or Catholicism or the faith. What they rejected was rejectable. That was the thing I mentioned already to you. I had to choose what I believed. And that was in the mid-60s. That do I believe in Christ or don't I? If I believe in Christ, then I can unpack the rest of the creed. Without Christ, it's nonsense. It's what it came down to. Do I believe in Christ? I wonder if that question was asked by those who left the faith, rather than thinking the church looks foolish, this whole thing is ridiculous, it's foolish, you see. Or it's abhorrent. In so many ways, I think the church appears abhorrent. A male-dominated, whatever. I don't know. But the fundamental question is, do I believe in Christ? Then, with that, one joins the apostles, stumbling along and figuring out as we go, as opposed to rejecting it outright. The apostles suffered what they believed, and they changed the world. The first thing they changed was themselves. And I know that I'm so grateful for that grace given to me that day, sometime, somewhere in between 63 and 65, when I was able to answer that question, when I said, do I believe in Christ? And my answer was yes. And from that time on, I unpacked that fundamental belief in the way that I've lived, in the adventure that I've experienced, through the suffering of death, those whom I have loved and been loved by, and the hope in tomorrow, both ministerially and existentially. That's the truth. I'm so grateful that I believe, and I always hope that I will stay a believer to the end.